Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another episode of Walk Magick. Today I'm going to give a little impromptu, no script talk about the nature of ordeals. So, with that, let's begin. Doing ceremonial magic or even mysticism, let's say yoga, right from the beginning, jumping into such text as Liber O and Liber E, when you start doing practices on a regular basis, magic holds up a mirror to self, and you get to peel back over time. The more intensive your practices get, you start to peel back layers of reality, so to speak, and you start to see things much differently, not as they appear to be, but more what's lying under the surface, whether that's the nature of reality. I don't like the term necessarily, but it conveys what I mean, the nature of God, right? The nature of self and the soul. And as you start to peel back these layers, several things happen. One, you start to get a better clarity of who you are as an individual. You reach a point of enlightenment to a certain degree, and you start to see your past, your actions, your present, and hopefully goals for the future for what they are based on your nature and based on the evolutionary process of the universe unfolding around you, the universe being in a constant flux of change, right? In doing magic, you are consciously affecting the change of your being through your nature, right? You're manifesting who you actually are. And you're also changing external nature with every single action. Now, everybody's doing magic with every intended act that causes change, right? To a degree, whatever their will was in that situation. True will and will obviously differ. I can will to do something that's not aligned with my nature, but my true will is always aligned with my nature. What I mean to say is that everybody is, to some degree, doing magic, only as magicians, we are more conscious of the actions we take, whether that be in the mundane world or in a sacred space, right? And what then are ordeals? Well, there are several types of ordeals, and there's probably more categories that you could put these in, but to simplify it, I would say there are primarily three classes, right? There's the mystical type of ordeal, right? Which, like in the Book of the Law, the ordeals I write not. For example, in the Book of the Law, the gross must pass through fire. Let the fine be tried in intellect, and the lofty and chosen ones in the highest, right? So there are several different types of ordeals. The mystical that fall into that category are when you're doing magic, and whether it's divinity or your HGA, implement ordeals in one sense to purify your being or to otherwise test your dedication. Now, in this class, let's say it's the testing aspect, doing magic, you were trying to come closer to that true source of nature, what we call God, divinity, the divine light, the invisible light, etc. And to a degree, we are meant to do the great work. The other part of that is there are blockades that have to be removed while you're doing the great work. And in any type of mystical system, I would say all mystics agree that it is a process that is not for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart. And there are trials because you're not necessarily, as a human, supposed to touch that divine source. Humans are where they are in the hierarchy. Angels are where they are. And gods, and then the true source are, there's tiers to divinity. And when you're trying to do initiatory magic and, let's say, ascend the tree of life, for example, those blockades are meant to keep each of these classes of beings, humans, angelic, even low spirits, which I classify below humans, they're meant to keep all of these categories in their particular space. And so by having tests, one, it tests whether your dedication is true, but also if you've actually done the work and the study and you're capable of reaching that next level of ascension. So the mystical in that sense are either to purify your being or to test you, to make sure that you are actually committed to the path. The next category I would say are really because of either other people not dealing with their shit and creating messes that you get caught up in, there's no way around it, or just natural events, karmic events. It could be your past karma, or it could be, natural disasters, and now you're experiencing something that, is devastating to you or to those you love. The last category is the self-made ordeals. And this latter class consists of such things as your vices, right? Like addictions, trials, fears, testing your decision making, dealing with losses and grievance, having lack of foresight into your actions or into events around you, and not being able to see what's going on and what's going to happen so you could kind of sidestep or go in a specific direction when need be. All of these things create ordeals for you. So we're going to talk a lot more about each of these. I think one of the best examples in the mystical category, if you put it in the context of always thinking about like your holy guardian angel, right? And if you're working like an AA style Golden Dawn system, every grade has some type of ordeals. And I'm going to read a quote from, I believe it's the Confessions, and that'll give you a good idea of the types of ordeals. And each grade has its own individual ordeals, and sometimes they're specific to the individual, but then there are sometimes some categories of ordeals that, as you'll see in this quote in a second, are almost universal. Bear with me, this is a little bit lengthy of a quote. "It was for me to sweep away all this nonsense, to re-establish the ordeals, in spirit and in truth. I was at first ignorant enough of magic to imagine that this could be done by the simple process of replacing sham formalities by real ones." End quote. He's talking about like, let's say in Golden Dawn traditions or even Masonic traditions where you're brought into the temple and certain things happen to test you in that sacred space when you're getting initiated. At the end of the day, you might feel some type of fear or lack of control in that situation, and that's good. But on the other side, you'll also probably know these people have vouched for you, or that other people have gone through these initiations and are fine. So while you might have some type of reaction to an initiation, you also know that, well, this is being administered, it is a formulaic ritual, it's going to be fine at the end of the day, right? So he's talking about formalities as opposed to real ordeals where things happen to you in the real world, right? So Crowley was charged in the Book of the Law to basically oversee the ordeals, is what he's talking about. To continue this quote, "I propose, for example, to test people's courage by putting them in actual contact with the four elements, and so on, as was apparently done in ancient Egypt. But experience soon taught me that an ordeal, however severe, is not much use in genuine initiation." End quote. Like in ancient Greece, right, when you go to see the Oracle of Delphi, you would go through that long, dark tunnel. That could be a ritualistic ordeal, right? Or actually coming in touch with being submerged in water, or coming in close proximity to fire, something like that. That's what he's talking about here. To continue, quote, "A man can always, more or less, brace himself up to meet a situation when he knows that he is on trial. A man might have a certificate of ability to swim half a mile, and yet be utterly unable, for a dozen different reasons, to save a friend from drowning when the need arose. Of course, it sounds totally impossible to administer ordeals of the real kind required, but I found by experience that I did not even have to give the matter a moment's thought. My magical self took complete charge of the business without wasting a moment or disturbing me. It may be through some act of my own, it may be entirely without my intention, that aspirants to the order find themselves in circumstances where they are tested in the qualities necessary to their stage of initiation. There is thus no possibility of evading the intentions of the order. End quote. Right? Like I believe it's all of the oaths that you take in each grade of AA. It always says, I'm going to butcher the quote, pardon me, but may AA lend me its wisdom, right? So it's kind of like you're tapping into the egregore, you're joining this system. Those who have gone through this system, especially that are now living on the spiritual plane, or even the gods or the secret chiefs overseeing the system, are lending their strength, their wisdom, their guidance to you, right? It's almost like you're now into that egregore, and that egregore is flowing through you, propelling you. There is thus no possibility of invading the intentions of the order. It is not conducted consciously by any men soever, but by mysterious forces automatically set in motion by the force of the obligations themselves. For example, the oath of a probationer apparently involves no difficulties of any sort. No penalties are stated or implied. The aspirant merely pledges themselves to perform the great work, which is to obtain the knowledge of the nature and powers of their own being. He is not required to reach any particular stage of knowledge by the end of his probation. He is free to choose such practices as appeal to him, and, provided that his record shows that he has devoted a reasonable proportion of his spare time to the work, he is unhesitatingly passed to the degree of neophyte. It sounds as if it were impossible for anyone to fail. Yet, actually only 8% manage to get through the year of probation. The reason is that no sooner does a man make up his mind to enter the path of the wise than he rouses automatically the supreme hostility of every force, internal or external, in his sphere. End quote. That's Confessions, chapter 62. Now, when I was working with William, this is true. We were going through a Golden Dawn style system of practice and initiation, particular tailor-made to me as the individual aspiring. And it was no sooner than I had taken, I believe it was first degree. He had issues with trauma from when he was young, and it ended up affecting our relationship to the point that we almost stopped talking, right? And for a while, we were out of contact, right? It wasn't completely broken off 100% that this is going to be the end of it, but there was a definite fracture that happened. And for me, that was the nature of an ordeal. And I saw it happening, and I was tested. It's, well, I'm committed to this path. Am I going to see through this path? And we ended up reaching out about a month or two later. We took a short hiatus from each other, talked about what had actually happened, got really honest with one another. It turned out that he had trauma from his childhood that led to sort of pathological lying situation, but he was able to be vulnerable and explain to me, these are the red flags of when that happens. These are the reasons from my childhood why that happens with people that I care about. And this is how we can avoid it. If we're to continue working together, both sides need to agree to this. So there was a way to navigate that situation, but it almost derailed the process. And that was early on in my work with him, right? So these things happen, they come up. It's almost like there are forces that start to work through you, and it could be circumstantial outside or it could be circumstantial inside, but something does happen, usually in initiation, that tests your resolve, whether or not you're going to continue on your particular path of initiation. Mind you, I could have went down a different route and still made progress in some other order, whatever, but I needed to continue the work with him, and that's ultimately what happened. Here is another quote from the Confessions, and it's going to give some specific examples of things that happen to like probationer and neophyte. Quote, I believed then and I believe now that the probationer of AA is nearly always offered the opportunity to betray the order, just as the neophyte is nearly always tempted by a woman. We read in the Book of the Law, chapter 1, verse 34, the ordeals I write not. He, the beast, may make severe the ordeals, which is verse 38. There is a word to say about the Hierophantic task. Behold, there are 3 ordeals in one, and it may be given in 3 ways. The gross must pass through fire, let the fine be tried in intellect, and the lofty chosen ones in the highest. The ordeals thou shalt oversee thyself, save only the blind ones. Refuse none, but thou shalt know and destroy the traitors. I am Rahor Kuit, and I am powerful to protect my servant. Chapter 3, verse 42. So, these blind ordeals presumably refer to such tests of fitness as that of which we have been telling. In the ancient mysteries, it was possible to appoint formal ordeals. A young man would go into a temple to be initiated, and he would know perfectly well that his life might depend on proving himself worthy. Nowadays, the candidate knows that his initiators will not murder him, and any ordeal proposed by them obviously appears a pure formality. In Freemason's Hall, he can swear quite cheerfully to keep silence under the penalty of having his throat cut across, his tongue torn out, and all the rest of it. The oath becomes a farce. In the AA, which is a genuinely magical order, there are no extravagant oaths. The candidate is pledged quite simply to himself only, and his obligation binds him merely to obtain the scientific knowledge of the nature and powers of their own being. There is no penalty attached to the breach of this resolution, yet, just as this resolution is in contrast with the oaths of other orders in respect of simplicity and naturalness, so also with regard to the penalties. To break away from the AA does actually involve the most frightful dangers to life, liberty, and reason. The slightest mistake is visited with the most inexorable justice." End quote. So as you can see, there's several things that Crowley talked about in this quote from Confessions. I didn't write down exactly what chapter, but you could probably type any of those few keywords in there and find it in the Confessions PDF. But yeah, like the probationer betraying the order, or yeah, I believe I took my 2nd degree and I had met somebody that was very, very toxic, yet I was pursuing. We did not end up having any type of relation, but we were talking about potential, one night stand type intimacy. But it was like a very toxic, damaged person. And as I started to see that, I started to realize, okay, I shouldn't be engaging with this person. We ended up breaking it off, but the fact that we had gone so far still ended up leaving me in a very emotionally rough state. So it was almost like a weird type of ordeal with somebody. Like I had been just doing magic and my spiritual practices for quite some years. It was early on into transition, so I was not looking for partners for some years prior to that. And then this was like a first potential, hey, this might lead to something, just pleasure oriented. And the fact that it got broken off because of seeing a lot of red flags ended up hurting my ego quite a bit. And, for me, that was an ordeal, but it was a learning lesson. In other cases, I asked William early on when I was working with him, like before we even started doing the main series of initiatory rituals, what are some pitfalls you've seen of occultists that seem super dedicated, but what are the pitfalls that end up stopping them from progressing at a certain point? And he said, well, one of the big ones I've seen in my 40 years of practicing are the person will be really good at magic, they'll be super dedicated, and then they'll meet a partner who despises magic. And that partner will dissuade them from doing their initiatory work. A lot of times it's from an Abrahamic faith, and that they become fractured with their will. It's like, well, do I stay with this person that I'm starting to fall in love with, or do I continue my initiatory path? And the pitfall is that a lot of people choose that relationship and, basically selling themselves, selling out to them. You know what I'm trying to say. But, yeah, they give up that part of themselves that they should be doing their great work, but due to feelings, they stop doing their initiatory work and they go that way, usually to their own devastation. At the very least, even if nothing happens to them, there's the factor that they could be making progress and they're not, and they have to live with that, and that's like the minimal. The other side is when you make a decision, you're now going down that path, and whatever happens, due to that decision, you have to live with the outcomes of that decision. So keep that in mind. Towards the end of the above quote that from the Confessions, to break away from the AA actually involves the most frightful dangers to life, liberty, and reason. If you're doing Golden Dawn style work and you feel it's either too intense or not for you, Crowley always highly, highly recommended that a person does not break away from an initiatory order when you're on either the pillars of mercy or severity. Once you start, you really should endeavor to finish, even if you get old and pass away before you finish, before you reach, say, abscisimus or whatever, right? Which is, I think, 99% of everybody that's doing occultism, right? It's like, but you should at least try to be in Malkuth, Yasod, or Tiferet. Don't be in like Chod, Netzach, Gibora, Chesed, Bina, Chakma. Don't be on either of those off-balance pillars. At least you'll have some semblance of stability and equilibrium if you stop saying like Tiferet, right? But if you get that far, you're really close to the point that you should be making contact with your holy guardian angel, which is one of the most important factors in a Thelemic magician's life, is to get in touch with, even say Golden Dawn system, that higher genius, right? And walk that path of true will and aligning your nature that you've figured out at that point with nature around you, very Taoist in that sense, and flowing with nature. So if you get to that point, it's like, why would you stop there? But things happen in people's lives and they feel, I can't do this right now, or I need a break, or I need to resign fully, or maybe I want to try a different path altogether. I don't like this anymore, whatever reasons. Being in an off-balance state, you're going to be living the rest of your life in that off-balance state until you progress then on your own to a sphere synonymous, whatever your life experience is, it needs to be synonymous eventually with that middle pillar. Otherwise, you find yourself in a very off-balance state. So it could be very dangerous to self. So let's talk about a little bit of natural events, karmic, or ordeals caused by other people. Right, I kind of shared a couple of experiences. I made the decision to engage with that one person that I ended up getting emotionally hurt by, and also William's trauma ended up affecting me. Those were both ordeals caused by other people, but I still had chosen to engage with both of these people, which inevitably caused the ordeal, right? So to the degree that I was responsible for being a magician that makes a decision, I put myself there. To a degree, it was not my problems that ended up hurting me, right? So, but you can be obviously hurt by other people. There's a lot of people not doing what they should be doing, not trying to figure out who they are as an individual, kind of just blowing like a leaf in the wind. Oh, I was born into this family and my family says I should do this, and so I have to go to that school and study that, or else I'm going to disappoint the family. Super undolemic. You need to figure out who you are. There's factors like, I think we're in like a global ordeal right now because there are so many people who are either not paying attention to the world around them, really not dealing with their own bullshit, and are just full of vices. And then there's a lot of really power-hungry tyrants ruling the world, right? And ruling the world based on greed and lust for power and lording over everybody else and collecting resources. To what end? I mean, it's like you're not going to take any of the world's resources with you when you inevitably pass away of presumably old age, right? But it's like this rampant egos. And then the people who support these power tyrants, right? And so there's corrupt natures there that are a lot of individuals not dealing with what they need to deal with. So thus we have corrupt governments making decisions and corrupt laws overseeing giant corporations that are doing God knows what pollution-wise to our globe, right? So we are inevitably in this global ordeal right now, and I guess humanity has always been there, but we're at a point where, hey, we have mass communication, we can communicate the right ideas to each other, but we also have mass communication that amplifies anger and the wrong ideas to each other, right? Say back in World War II, there's a factor of like, what did these people do to the Nazi SS government that they ended up committing this massive genocide, you know? And it's happening somewhat to a degree today in Israel. They're not necessarily putting people into gas chambers, but due to a fucked up Hamas government that bombed and took a bunch of hostages in Israel, while you have a tyrant in Israel, you know, bombing civilians in the Gaza Strip and elsewhere. And, you know, what did these individuals do, right? There was a government that made a decision that did something horrific, and now civilians are paying for it. Same thing in Germany, really fed up with the economic collapse after World War I. Things were not very stable over there. And then the same thing that's happening today. Oh, we have a scapegoat. Let's say it's this type of minority people. They are the problem. We use that to make the masses very emotional and get behind us. And we spew a message of, if we get rid of these people, everything else will be great. It's these people that are causing all the problems. Same thing happening in India with Muslims. It's like, if we just get rid of these people, everything in our country will be great. It's their fault that everything sucks here. It's not our vices and bad management and poor leadership that's causing the problems. No, it's these people, right? And in the United States, it's immigrants, predominantly from South America or even Asia sometimes, right? It's these people that are causing all the problems here. So it's like we've seen these same patterns for so long, and things like social media amplify these toxic messages. Now, in the midst of, what did all of these people as individuals do to deal with these mass ordeals that they have to deal with? Natural disasters occur. Let's say I'm born in a place where suddenly an earthquake hits some years into my life and I'm tragically hurt. I mean, yeah, it's some type of karmic thing that happens there, right? Some action caused that. Karma is not always necessarily a debt that has to be repaid. No, it's a result of there's something happened. Now more things are going to happen because of that event happening, right? And it's trying to be conscious as a magician of, okay, if I do something, things are going to happen as a result of that. I need to make a decision that is hopefully going to set off a chain reaction of events that is aligned with nature, as opposed to petty shit or unnecessary aggressive type things, harmful things, right? So it's being very conscious. But in the case where somebody's hurt by like a natural disaster, let's say they traveled, but their family is back there where the earthquake hit, they have to now deal with this whole grieving process because of something, a natural disaster that hurt their whole entire family, let's say, right? That could be an ordeal. And these are things that are without your power. However, they do affect you. And they're affecting you in a very specific way. And this is where I think the point of self-made ordeals comes in. Because we're affected by a million stimuli every single day, and it becomes our job to deal with this internal situation and not act out as a result of it. And that's where we get in the most trouble with ordeals. Things happen, whether they were mystically inclined, naturally inclined, whatever, or experientially inclined, right? Something happened to you as a child and you carry this trauma and hurt people, that could be an ordeal right there, right? So this here is an insert because there was two things in my little keynote section that I forgot to go over, so I'm plugging these in somewhere. Later on at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about like the self-made ordeals. We're going to get into that momentarily. I want to talk about like enemies, right? Since I'm going to plug this edit in right after the section of like events that cause ordeals. So let's say enemies. I just wanted to make a quick note on this. Enemies point to weak spots that you have. When somebody hurts you and you despise them because they hurt you or they did something nasty to you or they were rotten, there's something cool about having that person because it's reflecting to yourself that there's a point that this person could hurt you. It's not okay that they hurt you. They're going to have their own karma for doing whatever they did to you. However, it gives you a point of reflection so that you can see what inside of yourself has this weak point that is easily reflected. That's one thing. Another thing on the nature of mystical ordeals. I just wanted to mention Liber Chet, which I'll do very briefly right now. Going through Liber Chet, I see like a lot of it has to do, I see it as a lot of it has to do with like crossing the abyss and reaching Binah. You're reaching towards that cup of Babylon. And in Liber Chet, there's like a bunch of things that all are of the nature of ordeals, or at least sound like they're very much like ordeals. Let me read a couple of them. So here we go. Liber Chet, verses 7 through 12. Now, therefore, that thou mayest achieve this ritual of the Holy Grail, do thou divest thyself of all thy goods. Thou hast wealth, give it unto them that have need thereof, yet no desire toward it. So it's giving you the solution to that particular type of ordeal. What you need to do to actually get your ego past the Kabbalistic abyss. Or your ego won't get past, but so that you could propel yourself into the grade of Master of the Temple, your ego will remain below the abyss. But I think you know what I meant. Verse 8, thou hast wealth, give it unto them that have need of thereof, yet no desire of it. Thou hast health, slay thyself in the fervor of thine abandonment unto Our Lady. Let thy flesh hang loose upon thy bones, and thine eyes glare with the quenchless lust unto the infinite, with thy passion for the unknown, for her that is beyond knowledge, the accursed one. Thou hast love, tear thy mother from thine heart, and spit in the face of thy father. Let thy foot trample the belly of thy wife, and let the babe at her breast be the prey of dogs and vultures. For if thou dost not this with thy will, then shall we do this despite thy will, so that thou attain to the sacrament of the Grail in the chapel of abominations. And behold, if by stealth thou keep unto thyself one thought of thine, then shalt thou be cast out into the abyss forever, and thou shalt be the lonely one, the eater of dung, the afflicted in the day of be with us. I have my own experiences with this text, but let's go to Crowley, right? He kept trying to be a father when he should have been doing a lot of other things early on in life. And granted, he had a lot of issues. The women he were with had a lot of issues. Rose was alcoholic. He kept having children that were born and then dying in super early age. Right? He had a couple of children that died. Eventually, he did have one or two kids that, they did make it. They lived full lives. He has grandkids. I don't know if they're still alive today or whatever. I kind of don't pay attention to too much of that stuff. They're not involved in Thelema and influence in Thelema. It's not my business. They're just people living their lives, and they had a crazy grandfather, and that's that. But at a time when he should have been doing stuff with the Book of the Law, but didn't have any clue, he was completely ignorant as to what he was supposed to be doing with his incarnation. He was trying to be a family man, and the shit just kept not working. He tried multiple times, and it just kept not working. And he found himself in the nature of an ordeal. Did he have addiction problems? Yes. I don't like the term addiction. Chemical dependency. You could get past chemical dependency, and if you deal with your other shit, I do believe that you get to a point where you have no interest in drugs anymore, and, that's the end of that. However, he exhibited throughout his life multiple times of different chemical dependencies to the point that he bankrupted himself, right? Found himself in the nature of an ordeal. However, that could have also been his way through this text of divesting himself of all his goods, which is kind of ironic and funny. And it says in this passage that if you don't do this, we're going to compel you to do this. And it's not any people, this is God's. This is your HGA, this is secret chiefs that are talking. We will force you to do this. They will work through you and push you into circumstances that will make this shit happen so that you are purified, so that you can cross the abyss. And the only way not to be able to make that journey is because you rebel against the process, right? You may not know what you have to do, so they will do it for you. Just do not rebel in that process. You need to go along with that. And depending on how much karma needs to be burnt up is really how painful that process is going to be. Point is, try not to make more karma while you're going through that pain and hurt. But, okay, say you're dealing with the grieving process, loss of a loved one, or you're dealing with addictions and you're seeking pleasure, or we're dealing with reality and your nature and your will and trying to figure out what your job is as a magician. It's always coming from a place of fear. Always coming from a place of fear. If you're angry, it's because something ticked you off because it threatened your perception of self and liberty. There's a fear that you are going to be harmed in some capacity. If you're sad, it's usually because you have a fear of loss, or, that would be a most common one, or a fear of not having, and it makes you sad. Envy, the fear of not having enough. In any case, fear is almost always at the root of every single internal problem that we ever have. And here's the key to ordeals I'm going to give you. When you get bent out of shape because something fucking terrible happens, or you don't know how to cope with the situation, be very careful with the decisions you make. It's okay to feel intense emotion at any grade, in any system of the great work. You have a human body, the human body has a brain, the brain has chemicals that cause emotion. That's a natural thing that's going to happen. I don't care if you're a fucking ipsissimus. If you're an ipsissimus, incarnated into a physical body, you're going to have a brain that has emotional response. How you deal with that emotional response is the difference between, say, a practicus and an ipsissimus, right? How you deal with the response to external stimuli. What you do in any given situation. And there's no one size fits all. There's no turn the other cheek when somebody hits you every time. No, sometimes there's walk away. Sometimes there's defend yourself. There are very particular circumstances that you need to weigh out as an individual with every decision you make. However, when you get hurt, or when you're scared, or when you're fearful, or when you feel isolated, or when you feel like, I don't know how to deal with life, so I'm going to go into my vices, say sex addiction could be somebody's thing. Drug addiction could be somebody's thing. Alcohol could be somebody's thing. Gambling could be somebody's thing. Not doing your practices and instead doing anything else. Not doing your will because you want to be doing something that feels better than doing your will. Those could be vices, right? Making decisions when you are in an emotional place is sometimes you have to make a split-second decision. Other times it's always best, if you can, to hit the pause button and not make a bigger mess while you're emotional and spiritually, internally thrashing about inside of your own body because you don't know how to deal with something. It's always best to hit the pause button. And that's hard to do because you have to gain that ability to have the wherewithal to realize, oh shit, I'm in control of myself. Even though I'm extremely hurt right now, I can implement some degree of discipline, and what are my options here? Right? Because when you're living in strictly vices, you're going to be setting yourself up. Yeah, it says in the Book of the Law, it says in Liber Zadi, these vices are a virtue. They're a virtue because they're going to teach you what the fuck not to do sometimes. In Liber Zadi, I talked about it. It's like, yeah, I'm going to bring wisdom to your folly. It's fine. You want to be lazy, be lazy. You want to act a fool, act a fool. I'm going to bring wisdom to your folly. It's fine. Meaning you're going to learn from that. You're going to find yourself in an ordeal. And here's the final thing with ordeals. You keep repeating an ordeal until you get it right. We all have issues as humans. I have issues as a human. There's things that every single person has to work on. No human is going to be perfect. You might eventually get to a point where you realize, okay, I'm a light entity. I'm a portion of that divine light residing within a human body, but that human body is still going to be fumbly. You're going to drop something at the wrong time by accident. You're going to say something, put your foot in your mouth, whatever the situation is. Humans are not perfect. There's always something to work on. There's always something more to learn. Things are constantly changing in the universe. There is always something new to learn. And right, you want to be careful of that trap of like infinite knowledge and doth, but at the same time, your body's changing as you get older. You have to adapt to things, and you have to adapt to the way the world changes on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Things are constantly changing. Look 10 years ago and look today, the level of technology and the ability to communicate with one another. That's a change that took place within like a 30-year period, right? Where, I go on my phone and suddenly every single person I know is in my friends list and I could see exactly what they're thinking as they type in real time, you know? That wasn't like that 40, 50, 60 years ago, right? So things are changing and you have to adapt to that. But the nature of ordeals, you're going to repeat your ordeals until you surpass them. Sorry for the little diatribe rant that I just went on. So whatever situations you find yourself in as a result of either other people, your response to other people, or circumstances, the divine testing you, purging your soul with fire and purifying you, and yeah, it's fucking painful sometimes. You get hit with tests and you need to make a decision. How do I, as an individual, deal with this? And you have to also mind, if you make that decision, it doesn't fucking matter what anybody feels about how you're going to deal with something. You're the one that's going to live with the results of your decision. So just be firm about that, but also realize, okay, I'm making this decision. I believe it's the right one. Leave a little grain of salt, room for error, and room to adapt. Don't ever be so rigid that you can't adapt or change tactics when dealing with something internally or externally, right? But always work towards getting past the ordeal, because if you don't, right, here's an example, right? Like a woman who's in an abusive relationship finally gets out of it, but then goes into another abusive relationship. Gets out of it, but goes into another abusive relationship. Can't get out of that relationship and stays in that abusive relationship for years and years and years. There's something there that's causing that ordeal to happen on repeat. And again, whether you're consciously practicing magic or not, doing magic might make these happen a little bit more quickly, but ultimately everybody's dealing with ordeals. Everybody's ultimately doing magic at some point in their life. We as magicians are just trying to be better magicians than we were before we consciously started doing magic, right? Anyway, this person dealing with like abusive relationship, until that person figures out what inside of them is compelling them to keep getting into this situation over and over and over, and actually makes proper adjustments or gets the fucking lesson from that situation, there's a high probability that they're going to keep putting themselves into that position, right? It could be a boundary issue. Could be a fear issue. It could be, I don't know how to provide for myself. It could be a million different factors unique to that individual. They need to figure that out, and they need to learn how to get out of that situation. Sometimes that requires just simply asking somebody for help. Sometimes it requires something on a more internal level and changing. Sometimes it's a serious boundary thing. Sometimes it's a feeling of inadequacy, or I don't deserve anything better. Maybe that's coming from something else. And there's a whole chain of things leading back to some type of root of fear that needs to be uprooted, burned, and discarded. Right? So whatever it is, until you figure out what ordeal you're in when you're having them and you're bent out of shape constantly and things are constantly hurting, you need to figure out what that ordeal that's coming at you is. What is it trying to tell you about yourself? Magic's a mirror. You're holding up a mirror to yourself. You need to look in that mirror and see, what is it that needs to be changed? Once you could figure that out, you can make the necessary changes. That's, you'll keep repeating the ordeal over and over until you get that message. Sometimes it takes a long time. So it's like, don't ever judge somebody because they're going through some shit and don't know how to fix it. We'll all move past our ordeals eventually, but yeah, some of us are slower to deal with certain ordeals than others. Right? So it's kind of like a thing of no judgment on that note. I hope this was helpful. This is my take on ordeals. Probably could say a lot more. This was all off the top, so hopefully it wasn't too all over the place. Yeah, do the things, like, subscribe, share my videos. Appreciate it. Love is the law, love and do will. I'll catch you on the next one.